Tund had always thought he knew what love was, but lately something inside him had changed. The spark he once felt for his wife, Amina, seemed to have dimmed. At first he told himself it was just stress from work, the long hours at the office, and the endless responsibilities that came with life. But deep down he knew it was something more. It was Fola. He could not stop thinking about her. The way she smiled at him, the way she laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, it made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt with Amina for months. Amina had noticed the change too, but she never said much at first. She loved Tund dearly, and she believed in the vows they had made to each other. She would cook his favorite meals, try to make the house warm and welcoming, but every effort seemed to fall flat. Tund came home late, distracted and sometimes cold. His eyes would light up at the mention of Fola, but they were tired and heavy when he looked at Amina. That evening, Amina had prepared a simple dinner. She had lit a small candle on the dining table, hoping to bring some warmth into their home. The smell of jollof rice and fried chicken filled the room. She smiled softly as she called Tund to eat, but he didn't come immediately. When he finally arrived, he looked tired, his face tense, and there was a distance in his eyes that made Amina's heart sink. "Why is it so quiet here?" Tund asked, barely glancing at her. Amina tried to smile. "I thought we could have dinner together, just us. I made your favorite." Tund shrugged and sat down, not meeting her eyes. Amina watched him carefully, noticing the way his hands trembled slightly as he picked up his fork. She could see that he was distracted, and it hurt more than she expected. She wanted to ask him if something was wrong, but she hesitated, unsure how to start the conversation without upsetting him. "Are you happy, Tund?" she finally asked softly. Tund froze. He didn't answer immediately, and the silence felt heavier than any words could. Finally he spoke, but his voice was sharp, more angry than he intended. "Happy? I don't know what you mean. I'm busy with work. I have responsibilities." Amina shook her head slowly, trying not to cry. "I just mean, us. I feel like we're drifting apart. You don't smile at me like you used to. You don't talk to me. Sometimes I feel like I'm alone even when you're here." Tund's eyes flickered with frustration. He didn't want to hear this, not now. He had been trying to ignore the guilt, trying to push aside the feelings he had for Fola, but hearing Amina speak like this made it impossible. He snapped before he could think. "You think I'm ignoring you? Maybe I just don't care anymore. Maybe I need someone who actually notices me." Amina's hands froze on her plate. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Tund, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe I made a mistake marrying you," he said, rising from his chair. "Maybe I should have been with someone else, someone exciting. Someone like Fola." Amina felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The words hit her like a storm, cold and sharp. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stop, but she also felt a strange calm inside her. She realized in that moment that there was no reasoning with him. His mind was made up. I can't believe this," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she held her head high. "I gave you everything I had, Tund. I loved you with all my heart. And this is how you repay me." Tund avoided her gaze. He didn't answer. Instead he walked to the living room, picked up his phone and scrolled, pretending to be busy. Amina stared at him for a long moment, taking in the sight of the man she had loved for so many years. The man she had trusted more than anyone else in the world. And now he was gone, lost to someone else. She packed her things slowly, carefully, making sure not to leave anything behind that might remind her of him. Every photograph, every memento felt heavy in her hands. The memories of their wedding day, their quiet mornings together, their shared laughter, it all pressed down on her, but she refused to cry. Not yet. Not here. As she carried her bag to the door, she turned one last time to look at Tund. He didn't even notice her standing there. The man she had once called her partner, her friend, her love, was now a stranger, consumed by his own foolish desires. She felt a pang of sorrow but also a growing sense of strength. She realized that she didn't need his approval, his love, or his presence to be whole. When she stepped outside, the cool evening air brushed against her face. It was a small comfort, a reminder that the world was bigger than this moment of betrayal. She walked down the street, dragging her suitcase behind her, and didn't look back. She had no idea where she would stay or what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not beg for a love that had already left her. She would start anew even if it was painful. That night, Tund sat alone in the empty house, the sounds of the city outside echoing in the silence. He looked at the dinner table, the candle still unlit, the food untouched. For the first time he felt a twinge of guilt, but it was fleeting, buried under the excitement he felt for Fola. He convinced himself he had done the right thing. He didn't realize, however, that Amina's departure was not the end, it was only the beginning. Amina, meanwhile, found a small guest house not far from the city center. The room was simple, with a single bed and a small window that overlooked a quiet street. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She unpacked her bag slowly, placing her few belongings neatly on the shelves. She felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for what she had lost, but relief that she was free from the constant disappointment and neglect. She sat on the bed and closed her eyes, thinking about everything that had happened. The argument, Tun's harsh words, the betrayal, it all felt surreal. Yet beneath the hurt, a fire had begun to burn. A fire that told her she would not let this break her. She would survive. She would thrive. She would show Tun that leaving her was the biggest mistake he would ever make. And in that quiet room with the city lights twinkling outside, Amina made a silent promise to herself. She would rebuild her life, piece by piece. She would find joy in her own strength, and she would never again allow someone to make her feel worthless. Tund had chosen his path, and now she would choose hers. Amina had never imagined that moving next door to Tund would feel like a fresh start, but as she stepped into her new home, a small sense of hope blossomed inside her. The house was modest, with pale yellow walls, a tiny garden, and a small porch that looked out onto the street. It was not a mansion, but it was hers, and for the first time in weeks she felt a little spark of peace. She unpacked her belongings slowly, placing her favorite things carefully on the shelves. Each item reminded her of who she was, not who she had been with Tund. The first days were quiet, almost painfully so. She wandered around the small house, exploring every corner, and even though it was simple, she began imagining ways to make it beautiful. She hung colorful curtains, placed a few potted plants on the windowsill, and put a small table by the porch where she could sit in the mornings. Every small change gave her a feeling of control and ownership over her life, something she had not felt in a long time. Once the house felt a little like home, Amina began thinking about work. She had always loved sewing and making clothes, but over the years she had set aside her passion to take care of Tund and their home. Now, with her independence, she saw an opportunity. She could turn her love for tailoring into something productive, something that could give her both freedom and pride. She borrowed a small sewing machine from a friend and set it up in a corner of the living room. The machine was old and noisy, but it worked perfectly. She started by making simple items: pillow covers, small dresses, and bags. She took her creations to the local market, setting them neatly on a small table, hoping someone would notice. Her first few days were slow, and only a few neighbors stopped by to look. Some smiled politely, some walked past, but Amina did not feel discouraged. Each day she worked a little harder, improved her designs, and put more love into her creations. Slowly the neighborhood began to take notice. Her friendly greetings, her polite manners, and the little things she did, like helping neighbors carry heavy groceries or watering their plants when they were away, made people warm toward her. Children would stop by to watch her sew, fascinated by the colorful fabrics, and she would laugh with them, teaching them how to thread the needle or sew simple patterns. Every small connection she made strengthened her, building her confidence back piece by piece. Tund, meanwhile, noticed Amina from his window. At first he was confused. He did not expect her to move so close, and he certainly did not expect her to flourish. He watched as she tended her small garden, laughing with a neighbor who had come to see her sewing work. He saw her helping an elderly man carry his groceries and walking down the street with her head held high. But instead of understanding or feeling regret, he told himself that it would not last. "She will get bored eventually," he muttered to himself. "She will leave and I will still have everything I want." But Tun could not see the truth. Amina was not bored. She was not lonely. She was growing stronger, independent, and happier every single day. Every polite smile she shared, every small act of kindness, and every piece of clothing she sold gave her a sense of accomplishment that Tun could never understand. She laughed freely now, without fear or restraint, and she began to feel joy in ways she hadn't felt in years. Amina also started to meet new people. She became friends with Saad, a kind woman who ran a small grocery shop on the corner. Saad had lived in the neighborhood for many years and knew everyone. She taught Amina the best ways to sell her clothes and introduced her to customers. With Saada's guidance, Amina's business began to pick up. People admired her work and word spread quickly. Soon, she had steady customers who came specifically to buy from her. Every day she would sit on her porch in the morning, sewing or planning new designs while enjoying the cool breeze. She began to feel a sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. Each stitch, each finished garment, was a reminder that she was capable of achieving more than she had imagined. The house, once empty and quiet, now hummed with activity and life. Amina felt proud of the space she had created. Tund, seeing all this from his window, felt a strange mix of emotions. At first it was annoyance. He could not understand why she seemed so happy, and it made him uneasy. Then, a small part of him began to feel something he had not felt in a long time: jealousy. He watched as neighbors stopped to chat with her, as she laughed with the children in the street, and as she waved politely at everyone. His sidechick, Fola, was nowhere near as charming or graceful as Amina. Tund tried to brush off the feelings, but deep down he could not ignore the comparison. Despite this, Amina did not change her behavior. She did not act out of spite or revenge. She was simply living her life, enjoying her freedom and focusing on herself. She smiled at Tund when he passed by the window, though she kept her distance. The strength in her eyes told a story that Tund could not ignore. She was no longer the same woman he had left behind. She had become someone stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. One evening, after a long day of sewing, Amina sat on her porch and watched the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled faintly of flowers from the small gardens nearby. She thought about the past, about Tund, about the hurt and betrayal, but she did not dwell on it. Instead, she felt a quiet pride in how far she had come. She realized that her life had changed not because of Tund's actions, but because of her own choices. She had taken control of her life and refused to let anyone, not even the man she once loved, dictate her happiness. A few weeks later, Amina's business began to flourish even more. She started getting orders from other parts of the town. People admired her work not only for its quality but for the passion she put into it. The local community respected her, and her confidence grew even stronger. She had become independent in every sense: financially, emotionally, and socially. She no longer worried about Tund or what he thought. Her happiness came from within, and that was something he could never take away. Tund, despite his initial dismissal, could not stop noticing her. He would glance at her from the window, sometimes catching her smiling at a neighbor, sometimes watching her give a small child a piece of candy. Each time, a pang of regret would hit him, though he quickly pushed it aside. He tried to focus on Fola, but it was impossible to ignore Amina's strength and the way she carried herself. He realized, though too late, that she was becoming someone he had underestimated, a woman who could thrive without him, a woman whose light could shine even brighter when he was not there. Amina, however, did not need his acknowledgement. She had found herself again, her purpose and her joy. Every morning, as she opened the small shop in her living room and displayed her handmade dresses and clothes, she felt a sense of freedom that was new and exhilarating. She had turned her pain into power, her heartbreak into motivation, and her loss into opportunity. Amina had learned that true strength was not in confrontation or anger but in showing the world who she really was. She knew that Tund was watching, even if he didn't admit it, and that knowledge fueled her quiet determination. She did not seek revenge with words or threats. Instead, she let her actions, her life, and her character speak louder than any argument ever could. Every day she took small steps that slowly transformed the street and the people around her. She started by helping her elderly neighbor Mr. Ade, who lived alone a few houses down. He was a kind man but struggled with the weight of daily chores. Amina would carry his groceries from the market, water his plants, and even cook small meals for him when she had time. She did not ask for anything in return and she never made a show of it, but the neighbors noticed. They admired the way she treated everyone with respect and kindness. Even children began to follow her around, fascinated by her sewing and her gentle smile. Amina also began offering free sewing lessons to the children in the neighborhood. Every afternoon, a small group would gather around her porch, watching as she skillfully threaded needles, cut fabric, and stitched colorful patterns. She taught them patiently, explaining every step, and soon the children began to make simple bags, pillow covers, and dresses of their own. The neighbors were amazed at her generosity and the way she had made learning fun. It was as if she had breathed new life into the street, turning it into a place full of laughter, learning, and warmth. While Amina quietly changed the neighborhood, Tund remained at home watching through his window. At first, he dismissed her activities as trivial. "She's just trying to make herself look busy," he muttered to himself. "She will get tired soon and then she will leave." He told himself this repeatedly, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that had begun to grow in his chest. But as the days turned into weeks, Tund could not deny what he saw. The neighbors greeted her warmly whenever she walked down the street. Children ran to her, laughing and calling her name. People stopped by to buy her sewing work, complimenting her skills and her dedication. Even Mr. Ade, who rarely spoke to anyone, would wave and smile whenever she came around. Amina had become a part of the community in a way that Tund had never been, and slowly the realization began to gnaw at him. Tund tried to cling to Fola, hoping her presence would distract him from the discomfort he felt whenever he saw Amina thriving. At first, Fola's laughter and charm seemed enough, but soon he began noticing the differences. Fola complained constantly, demanded attention, and cared little about anyone other than herself. She criticized Tund for small things, grew jealous when neighbors admired him, and often created tension in the house. Compared to her, Amina's calm, generous, and loving nature seemed almost magical. The more Tund observed, the more a strange emptiness grew inside him. He had thought leaving Amina for Fola would bring excitement and happiness, but instead, it only highlighted what he had lost. Fola's charm was fading, revealing her selfishness and shallow nature, while Amina's grace, independence, and kindness were undeniable. She had turned heartbreak into strength, and he could not ignore the fact that she had moved forward without him. Amina's subtle acts of kindness extended beyond the street. She began helping a local market vendor, Moyo, with small repairs in his shop, arranging his goods neatly and sewing new aprons for him. She mended the torn clothes of children who could not afford new ones, giving them away quietly without asking for thanks. Her actions created a ripple effect, inspiring others in the neighborhood to help one another. People admired her not only for her skills but for the way she treated everyone with fairness and respect. Tund began to notice the way neighbors spoke about her. "Amina is such a kind woman," they would say. "She's so helpful and patient. We are lucky to have her here." The words stung him, though he tried to hide it. He had underestimated her. He had believed that leaving her would make life easier, but instead he had opened his eyes to a truth he had ignored. Amina's worth was greater than he had ever realized. Amina herself noticed Tund's gaze occasionally. Sometimes he would peer out of his window, watching her as she taught the children, carried groceries, or smiled at neighbors. But she did not seek his approval or try to impress him. She did not confront him with anger or bitterness. Instead, she focused on her life, her work, and her happiness. She let him watch, letting the contrast between Fola's selfishness and her own dignity speak for itself. One afternoon, a small accident occurred in the neighborhood. A little girl tripped over a loose stone and scraped her knee. Amina rushed to help her, cleaning the wound and calming her down with gentle words. She bandaged the scrape carefully, then walked the girl back to her house, making sure she was safe. Tund, witnessing the scene from across the street, felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt. Fola, who had been sitting beside him, rolled her eyes. "Why are you watching her so much?" she asked. But Tund could not answer. He knew the truth deep inside. Amina's heart, her courage, and her kindness were things Fola could never match. The days passed, and Amina's presence on the street became a source of comfort and joy for everyone. She would bake small treats for neighbors, help elderly women carry their baskets, and organize small gatherings where people could share stories and laughter. The children she taught began showing off their sewing projects proudly, and she would clap and cheer for them, encouraging their creativity. Slowly, she became the heart of the street, a source of warmth and inspiration. Tund, once proud of his choices, began feeling the emptiness of his own life. Fola's complaints grew louder, her selfishness more apparent, and her charm had vanished entirely. He realized that no amount of attention from Fola could compare to the respect, love, and admiration that Amina received naturally. It was as if the street itself had recognized her value, while he had chosen someone who could not even see it. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amina sat on her porch surrounded by children showing off their small sewing projects. She laughed softly, encouraging them, her voice full of warmth. Neighbors passed by, greeting her with smiles, and even Mr. Ade, the elderly man she helped, waved proudly. In that moment, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went far beyond money or attention. It was a deep, quiet joy that came from making a positive difference in the lives of others. Tund watched from his window, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. He wanted to call out to her, to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. Every smile she gave, every kind act she performed, reminded him of the love he had thrown away. He had left a woman who could inspire and uplift everyone around her for someone who could not even see beyond herself. The realization was painful, and yet he could do nothing to change it. Tund could no longer ignore the growing emptiness in his life. He had thought that leaving Amina for Fola would bring him happiness, excitement, and freedom, but instead, it had left him restless and uneasy. At first, he tried to bury the feeling, convincing himself that Fola's presence was enough. But day by day he began to notice how different his life felt without Amina, and the comparison was painful. It was on a quiet Saturday morning that Tund decided to try and get close to Amina again. He bought a small bouquet of flowers, simple yet elegant, hoping that the gesture would melt her heart and remind her of their past love. The flowers were wrapped neatly in paper, tied with a red ribbon. He rehearsed what he would say, imagining that perhaps she would forgive him, that perhaps he could undo some of the mistakes he had made. When he approached her house, he saw Amina tending to the children she taught sewing to. She laughed softly at a child who had accidentally spilled a jar of buttons on the floor, kneeling to help pick them up. Her hair was tied neatly, her dress modest but elegant, and her smile was warm, genuine, and full of life. Tund's heart skipped a beat. He had seen her every day from his window, but seeing her like this, alive, strong, and happy, was almost unbearable. "Amina," he called softly, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. She turned toward him, her eyes calm and steady. She did not rush toward him, did not drop what she was doing, but gave a polite nod and a small smile. "Hello, Tund," she said quietly. He held out the bouquet. I'm sorry, Amina. I know I hurt you. I didn't realize what I had and I want to make things right. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Amina looked at the flowers, then at him. Her expression was composed, gentle, but firm. "Tund, I appreciate the flowers," she said softly. "But things are different now. I have moved on. My life is my own and I am happy." Tund felt a sting in his chest. He had expected some anger, maybe even tears, but not this calm composure. She was polite, yet distant, and it made him realize that he no longer had the hold over her that he once did. The thought of losing her for good hit him harder than any argument they had ever had. "I know I was foolish," he admitted, stepping closer, his voice trembling slightly. "I made a terrible mistake. I see it now." Amina gently raised her hand. "Tund, please. I do not want to argue. I have built my life, and I will not let the past destroy the peace I have found. I hope you can understand that." Her words were not harsh, not angry, but they carried a weight that Tund could not deny. She had healed, grown stronger, and moved forward. She did not need him to be happy, and that realization made his regret even more unbearable. Meanwhile, Fola's true nature began to reveal itself more clearly. She grew impatient with Tund's attempts to reach out to Amina, complaining constantly about minor things. She criticized his every word, accused him of thinking about his ex-wife too much, and made their home tense and uncomfortable. Tund tried to dismiss it at first, hoping her jealousy would fade, but it only grew. He realized painfully that Fola's charm was temporary and shallow. She cared little for him beyond what he could give her at that moment, and she certainly did not compare to the love and kindness he had left behind with Amina. The more he saw Amina's life thriving without him, the more he regretted his choices. She was respected in the neighborhood, admired for her skills, and loved for her generous heart. She smiled often, laughed freely, and was surrounded by friends and children who adored her. Tund had left all of that behind, chasing something superficial that now felt empty and meaningless. One evening, as Amina walked down the street carrying some of her sewing work to a neighbor, Tund followed quietly, unable to stop himself. He watched her greet the neighbors, hand out a few handmade dolls to the children, and smile warmly at everyone she passed. Her presence radiated joy and confidence, a life that was vibrant and full. He felt a sinking feeling in his chest. He had thought leaving her would be the best decision, but now he saw the truth. He had lost someone irreplaceable. Tund tried to speak to her again, this time without the flowers. "Amina, please just listen to me," he said as she stopped briefly to greet a neighbor. She turned to him, her expression calm. "Tund, I am listening," she said softly, "but I cannot change the past. I cannot undo what has already happened. My life is moving forward and I hope yours will too, but separately." The firmness in her voice made him take a step back. It was not rejection born of cruelty, it was the dignity of someone who had learned her own worth. Tund realized, painfully, that Amina no longer depended on him for her happiness. He had taken her love for granted, and now, she was a woman he could never possess again in the same way. Fola's complaints became louder, her selfishness more obvious, and Tund could no longer ignore it. She criticized him for watching Amina, for thinking about his past, for not being as attentive as she demanded. Every moment with Fola reminded him of the joy and love he had left behind with Amina, and it deepened his regret. He began to understand the cost of his decisions, the pain he had caused, and the foolishness of leaving someone who had genuinely loved him for years. Meanwhile, Amina continued to flourish. She organized small gatherings for the neighborhood children, taught new sewing techniques to her students, and helped neighbors with daily tasks without expecting anything in return. Her life was full of meaning, and she radiated a quiet confidence that made people admire her. Tun could see it, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not reclaim the life he had thrown away. One afternoon, as Amina was returning from the market, Tund approached her again. He tried to apologize, explain himself, and ask for a second chance, but she remained composed. "Tund," she said gently, "I know you regret what happened. I know you wish things were different. But my happiness is no longer tied to you. You cannot change the past, and I will not allow it to control my present." Her words struck him deeply. The truth was undeniable. Amina had moved on, built a life, and found strength in her independence. Tun's attempts to win her back only highlighted his own foolishness. He had lost her not because she had failed, but because he had chosen someone else. That evening, Tun sat alone in his house, Fola beside him complaining about a minor inconvenience, and realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had left a woman of substance, of strength, of kindness, for someone who could never match her heart or her spirit. The realization was painful and inescapable. He understood now that Amina's calm composure, her success, and her joy were not things he could take back. She had created a life for herself, one that thrived without him, and he had no role in it. Amina, on the other hand, went to bed that night with peace in her heart. She had faced heartbreak, betrayal, and loss, yet she had not allowed it to define her. She had reclaimed her life, built her independence, and found happiness in herself and in the community she had nurtured. She did not need Tun's acknowledgement or approval. Her strength and resilience were enough. Amina had grown into a woman whose life was full, meaningful, and independent. Her small tailoring business continued to thrive, and her reputation in the neighborhood had blossomed into admiration and respect. Every morning she woke up with purpose, ready to greet the day with energy and optimism. She would open her shop, arrange her clothes neatly, and prepare for the day's customers. People came from nearby streets and even distant parts of town because they knew her work was both skillful and heartfelt. She had also become a central figure in her community. Neighbors trusted her, children looked up to her, and even those who once doubted her abilities had begun to rely on her guidance. Amina would help with small tasks, offer advice when asked, and support anyone in need without hesitation. Her kindness was natural, not forced, and it earned her the love and respect of everyone around her. Despite all her success, she remained humble. She did not flaunt her achievements or boast about her independence. She smiled, laughed, and shared her joy with others, always including those around her in the happiness she had found. Even simple things, like handing a child a handmade dress or helping an elderly neighbor with groceries, became acts that strengthened her position in the hearts of everyone on the street. Her life was full of love, respect, and meaning. Tund, meanwhile, was left alone to confront the consequences of his choices. Fola, whose charm had initially distracted him, had grown impatient, demanding, and increasingly selfish. She complained constantly, criticized Tund for small mistakes, and revealed a side of herself that he had ignored in the excitement of their early encounters. Tund had realized too late that Fola's love and attention were shallow and conditional. She cared little for his happiness beyond what she could gain, and it became clear that she could never match the warmth, patience, and love that Amina had given freely for years. Tund's realization came slowly, a painful process that began each day as he watched Amina from his window. She moved with grace and confidence, helping neighbors, teaching children, and smiling freely. She was no longer the quiet, timid woman who had once depended on him. She had become strong, self-assured, and independent. Her life thrived without him, and it was impossible for him to ignore the stark contrast between Amina's joy and Fola's constant demands. He tried to reach out to Amina again, bringing flowers, apologies, and explanations. He wanted to tell her how much he regretted his choices, how much he missed her, and how foolish he had been to leave her for someone like Fola. But each attempt was met with her calm composure. She listened politely, acknowledged his words, but kept her distance. She had no need for his approval or attention, and her polite but firm responses reminded him that he could no longer hold a place in her life the way he once had. Amina had learned to protect her peace and independence. She understood that accepting his apologies did not mean she had to let him back into her life. She had built her world without him, and she was not willing to sacrifice her happiness for someone who had chosen to betray her trust. Tun's words, while sincere, could not undo the strength she had gained, nor could they erase the life she had rebuilt on her own. The neighborhood had noticed the changes as well. People would talk about Amina's generosity and skill, praising the way she treated everyone with respect and fairness. Children she had taught would proudly show off their sewing projects, smiling as she applauded their efforts. Neighbors would greet her warmly, thanking her for small acts of kindness, from delivering groceries to lending a hand in minor repairs. Each act reinforced her place as a trusted, respected, and admired member of the community. Tund watched all of this and felt an emptiness he could not escape. The realization hit him harder with each passing day. He had lost someone irreplaceable. Amina's love had been genuine, patient, and selfless, while Fola's attention was fleeting and conditional. He began to understand that his pursuit of temporary excitement had cost him a lifetime of respect, love, and stability. He was left with nothing but regret, and the emptiness of his own choices weighed heavily on him. Even when he tried to involve himself in neighborhood events or casual interactions, he could see the difference. Amina was the center of attention, admired for her contributions, while he and Fola were often ignored or dismissed. He realized that the respect and admiration she had earned could not be bought, begged for, or replaced. Her life was full of meaning and he was no longer a part of it. Amina, on the other hand, moved through life with a quiet confidence. She did not dwell on Tund's mistakes, nor did she waste energy wishing him regret. Instead, she focused on the things that brought her joy: teaching, creating, helping, and building relationships that mattered. Her heart was light and her mind was free. She had discovered that true happiness came from within, not from the approval of someone else. She also found peace in solitude. She spent evenings sitting on her porch, watching the sunset, reflecting on how far she had come. The memories of heartbreak and betrayal no longer held power over her. They were lessons, reminders of her resilience. Every challenge she had faced had only strengthened her, and every small victory reminded her of the life she had fought to reclaim. Over time, Amina's reputation grew beyond the neighborhood. People from nearby areas came to her for sewing work, for advice, and for guidance. She became a symbol of strength, independence, and resilience. Her story was quietly inspirational. It was proof that one could recover from betrayal and build a life filled with dignity and respect. Tund, despite his regret, could not undo the life she had built. He realized painfully that Amina did not need him to be happy. The love, respect, and admiration she received were fruits of her own hard work, kindness, and integrity. No flowers, apologies, or attempts at reconciliation could replace what he had lost. He had thrown away something rare and he now faced the full weight of that loss. Even Fola began to see the truth. Her complaints and selfish behavior had driven Tund to a realization he could not ignore. She could not provide what Amina had, and the contrast between them became more obvious every day. Tund's admiration for Amina's strength and composure grew, but it was too late. Amina had already moved past him, thriving in every aspect of her life, while he remained trapped in regret. Amina's focus on her community, her work, and her own happiness continued to bring her fulfillment. She never sought revenge or satisfaction from Tund's pain. She simply lived her life fully. She found joy in small moments: a child's laughter, a neighbor's gratitude, a perfectly sewn garment, and quiet evenings on her porch. Each day reinforced the truth that she was capable, independent, and strong. Tund, however, had no choice but to confront his foolishness. He realized that the love he had thrown away could never be returned in the same way. He had underestimated her strength, her resilience, and her ability to thrive without him. Every glance from his window reminded him that she had built a life filled with meaning, purpose, and joy, without him. In the end, Amina's journey was complete. She had transformed her pain into power, her heartbreak into motivation, and her loss into freedom. She had regained her confidence, independence, and sense of self-worth. She was admired and respected by everyone around her, loved for her kindness, and recognized for her hard work and talent. Her life was a testament to resilience and strength. Tund remained a reminder of the consequences of poor choices and misplaced priorities. He had lost someone irreplaceable and was left alone with regret and emptiness. The lessons were hard, but they were his to bear. Amina, however, had no regrets. She had discovered her true strength, found happiness within herself, and learned that her life did not depend on anyone else's approval or affection. And so, life continued for Amina, full of warmth, love, and purpose. She had proven to herself and the world that true strength came from within. She had survived betrayal, built a thriving life, and discovered happiness that no one could take away. Her past with Tund was a memory, a chapter that had shaped her, but it did not define her. She had moved forward, stronger, wiser, and free. Her story ended not with revenge or anger, but with success, independence, and joy. Tund's mistakes had only highlighted her resilience and strength. She had found herself, reclaimed her life, and built a future she could be proud of. And in doing so, she had created a life where she was truly unstoppable, truly happy, and truly free.